It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. In the crisis circling the BBC and one of its presenters, there are at least 2 more young people reportedly making claims tonight. The BBC may have been slow to raise a red flag over the initial complaint, admits its Director General, and he hasn't yet spoken to the presenter himself. Fear and fatigue on the Ukrainian front line as NATO meets to discuss its future, the soldiers living the reality of the war. The warmest of welcomes for President Zelensky, but harsh words over a cold shoulder as he says it's absurd not to give his country a date it can join. Paying for a pay rise as wages spiral despite the pain from interest rates, a warning they could rise yet further. The deaths and damaged lives from America's latest drug as the White House pledges action to stop the spread of tranq. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30. Hello, good evening. For the past 4 days, the crisis around the BBC and one of its presenters has circled around the allegations over one young person. He is accused of paying for explicit images beginning when they were just 17. Tonight, there are at least 2 more individuals with their own sets of allegations for the presenter and corporation to contend with. One is said to have had contact online and said they felt threatened after being sent abusive, expletive-filled messages. And the latest claim, first reported this evening, that the presenter broke lockdown rules to meet after connecting on a dating site. The BBC Director General has admitted that he hasn't yet spoken to the presenter in question and that red flags may not have been raised quickly enough. Our home editor, Jason Farrell, has this report.
A BBC camera trained on its own door. The media circus in its courtyard. Another day, another twist in the story. The BBC reporting that another young person was contacted by the same still unnamed BBC presenter in an online dating app, and when they realised who it was, were later threatened with expletive messages not to go public. It was ahead of this revelation the BBC Director General was interviewed on the BBC World at 1 about the perceived lack of pace of its internal investigation.
Do you think it's odd that the presenter was only spoken to last Thursday?
Not because, no, because what has happened is simple, is that
And what was his response when he was spoken to? Has he denied it?
I'm not going to get into the specific conversations with the presenter.
Have you spoken to him?
Personally, no. He's been spoken to by a senior manager.
Has he offered to resign?
Again, that is a matter that I think we have to respect the privacy of an employee.
Except we're in a very strange situation, aren't we, in that he's not been named, but everyone in this building knows who it is. And there are an awful lot of people who you also have a duty of care to, male presenters on air, who are having to go on air to say that it's not them. It's not a sustainable situation, is it?
It is a very difficult and complex situation.
Today, a timeline was revealed about the complaint against the presenter. On May the 18th, a family member came to a BBC building to make the complaint. A day later, they contacted BBC Audience Services, who escalated it. It was assessed as not criminal but needing further investigation. So that day, the BBC emailed the complainant for further information. They get no response. And 3 weeks later, they make a call, but it doesn't connect. A month passes before The Sun contacts the BBC, the first time the Director General or Executive Directors are aware of the case. That day, a senior manager speaks to the presenter for the first time about the allegations, and they agree to take him off air. The next day, the BBC contact the police, and on Monday, the police request that the BBC pause their investigation so officers can assess the case. As today happened to be the BBC's annual report, other journalists were allowed to type questions to be read out to the Director General in a Zoom conference call. I asked if Tim David could clarify the difference between the initial complaint and what was printed in The Sun.
Responding to my question, the Director General said that the allegations received on May the 19th were very serious, but were not considered by the BBC's corporate investigation team to be criminal. What he didn't say was why. How did they differ from what was printed in the Sun newspaper?
In the Sun newspaper, the complainants say they made it clear to the BBC that the teenager was underage when the presenter is first alleged to have paid them for explicit photographs. Although a police force outside of London has now revealed it investigated this claim in April and found no evidence of criminality.
My feeling is at some point the dam will burst. You can't go on having this extraordinary kind of phony war going on between the BBC management, their own news staff, and all the journalists of Fleet Street crying out for more information.
New lines, chatter and debate fill the airways on its own channels.
We're watching your show this morning on the screen.
Nice one.
There.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have a good debate with everybody about what happens next?
It's a very interesting debate, and we were walking over eggshells.
All but the missing name that everyone in this building knows and no one is allowed to say. But for how long? Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, some of the BBC's best-known male presenters have faced unfounded allegations online as a result of the crisis at the corporation. One of them, Jeremy Vine, has tonight used his social media account to say he thinks the presenter in question should come forward publicly to stop what he called more vitriol being thrown at innocent colleagues. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has been looking at the impact the allegations are having online.
One of the questions when it comes to a story like this, which can perhaps seem like the media talking about itself, is how much the public really cares. In this case, though, they do. And that also comes with some risks. Before that, we've been taking a look at how public interest in the story, the identity of the BBC presenter in question, has played out on social media. That was one hashtag on Twitter, and here is another. The most prominent hashtags around the issue, at their peak yesterday, they were used some 25,000 times. And that was around the same time that the young person at the centre of the story said, via lawyers, that nothing inappropriate or unlawful happened with the unnamed presenter. Twitter isn't, of course, the entire world, but even on TikTok, the story's getting lots of attention. Here's a similar sort of hashtag. And the second hashtag, again, similar to what we saw on Twitter, again, very popular up there. And across the web, too, people are searching for this. This is the interest on Google, with people seeking out information. Searching is different from posting, though, especially when it comes to specific names. It could have serious consequences and even lead to libel action. A number of names have been circulating to the extent that some BBC presenters have made clear they're innocent and unconnected to the case. Among them, Jeremy Vine, Gary Lineker, Ryland Clark and Nikki Campbell. We've charted how many times their names were posted on Twitter, along with two other BBC presenters who've not made any public comment. And tonight, Jeremy Vine has called on the unnamed presenter to reveal themselves, to take away some of the vitriol these presenters are getting online. But libel law applies to everyone, not just journalists. And that means anyone posting names like this could face serious consequences.
I think the law of privacy is in a really difficult place. In particular, there's a real grey area about when journalists can report the names of people subject to these allegations. I think it is a huge phenomenon on social media over the last few days. People just don't know what the potential consequences are. They might think it's a laugh, but of course they are really damaging allegations to the people who are not involved.
It makes for a very modern media frenzy. Traditional publishers avoiding names because of privacy laws, and so fueling rampant and potentially damaging speculation online.
And this is the latest front page from The Sun tonight. It is reporting the BBC presenter broke lockdown to meet another young stranger. Well, let's go to our home editor, Jason Farrell, who's here with me. Jason, at least two more young people, it seems, coming forward, although worth remembering that the original young person in The Sun's first article has said through a lawyer to the BBC that the claims about them are rubbish.
Yes, and indeed the BBC had paused its internal investigation into that claim because it said that the police were investigating that and they needed them to allow them to do their work. But now they've got more on their plate because there's an allegation in the Sun newspaper that a 23-year-old who met this presenter on a dating website claims that the presenter in the third lockdown in February 2021 decided to go across town, breaking lockdown rules, to meet this young person. They also claim that they got payments of £200 twice and £250, and felt like the presenter owned them. On top of that, we have the claims from the BBC, which we were talking about earlier, where they are suggesting that there was an individual who met this presenter, again in a dating app, then went to a private app, and then perhaps suggesting that they might name the presenter online, got threatening messages with expletive-filled threats, and felt scared and frightened. And importantly, the BBC say that they have verified that belonging to the presenter's phone, which is perhaps stronger evidence in some ways than what they've perhaps already seen from The Sun. So this, really, again, adds a new dimension to it. They have approached that presenter. The presenter has refused to comment. And amid all of this, you've got people like Jeremy Vine saying, come on, it's time to come out, it's time to break cover. The BBC is on its knees. What the presenter will think, who knows? But they might think, well, what else is going to come out? Let's just wait and sit this out. Or they might think, no, Jeremy Vine's got it right. It's time to break cover.
Jason, thank you. Well, if you scan the QR code on screen now, you can listen to the latest edition of the Sky News Daily podcast. Today, Kimberly Leonard is looking at the crisis happening at the BBC. You can subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts and on the Sky News app. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said today it was absurd that NATO hasn't yet given his country a date for joining the alliance. Whether that may or may not happen, it will not deliver help for his soldiers, many exhausted on the battlefield right now. Well, for months, the front lines were largely static, but the Ukrainians say they've now retaken around 100 square miles of territory in their counter-offensive. Well, the main pushes have been south of Zaporizhzhia and in the east around Bakhmut and towards Donetsk, although progress has been slower than many had hoped. Sky's international correspondent John Sparks has been speaking to one volunteer, an Irishman who's been fighting on the front lines in the east of the country, and sent this report.
It's got to be unloaded. Unloaded? Yeah, unloaded bag.
There was little fanfare on departure for a pair of foreign fighters who'd come to Ukraine's aid. Hundreds, if not thousands, of international combatants have been fighting on the Ukrainian side, but this small group has had enough, beginning what will be a long journey home.
We're stuck!
The Ukrainian counter-offensive has struggled as the Russians deploy artillery and mines to slow them down. The fighting has been brutal, although no one was killed here. For the foreign fighters, there is a refuge near the front, and we met an Irishman here who's been fighting in Ukraine for the past 17 months.
What is it like right now on the front line?
Zero line, it's horror. It's horror. There is just, it's a genocide, it's slaughter. There is just people dead everywhere. Russians dead, Ukrainian people dead, Ukrainian soldiers dead, just left there.
Rhys Byrne says he was almost killed a few weeks ago as his multinational unit prepared to attack the line.
We were told there's a Russian trench line, and our job is to go into the trenches and clear them out, hold them until auxiliary units come, and then we go home.
They were taken to a staging post, and when a tank approached in the distance, they assumed it was one of theirs.
But you're doing all right, though?
Yeah, I'm good.
It wasn't. Soldiers took cover in the woods, hoping that assistance would arrive.
Any station, this is Bravo. Can anybody hear me? Can anybody read me? Go!
As light fell, a Ukrainian truck pulled up, and the survivors scrambled into the back. But they'd been spotted by a Russian tank.
Where's the Humvee? Let's go! Move!
That's terrifying. When you see a big T-72 coming for you and you're in a Humvee pickup, yeah, it's like a hot knife through butter. You're finished. So again, all of us are screaming, drive the Humvee, drive the Humvee. I was going mental.
The incident would prove the final straw for Byrne and a Danish colleague who packed their bags after 17 months of living on the edge. but they admit their memories will never leave them. John Sparks, Sky News in eastern Ukraine.
Well, President Zelensky will meet the leaders backing him in the war in Ukraine tomorrow, even as he questions how quickly they might allow his country to join NATO. Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes reports now from the Alliance's summit in Lithuania.
Ukraine's president on the world stage, needing to be heard.
Slava Ukraini!
The crowd in the Lithuanian capital hang on his every word. But he has a much tougher audience when it comes to NATO allies meeting down the road.
Today I started my journey with faith in solutions, with faith in strong partners, with faith in NATO. In a NATO that doesn't hesitate, that doesn't waste time, and doesn't look over their backs at any aggressor.
President Zelensky is leading his country in a fight for survival. That doesn't just mean defeating Russia on the battlefield. It also means securing Ukraine's place in NATO, and that requires a different kind of fight.
On the first day of their summit, the allies reaffirmed a commitment for NATO to join the club. But even as they met, the Ukrainian president slammed as absurd their failure to offer a timeframe for this and warned it would play into Russia's hands. The Secretary-General tried to make what ultimately is a bit of a fudge sound positive.
We also made clear that we will issue an invitation for Ukraine to join NATO when the allies agree and conditions are met. This is a strong package for Ukraine and a clear path towards its membership in NATO.
But the leader of the Czech Republic spelt out the risk of empty words.
It is in our interest to support Ukraine. It is also vital that we show Ukrainians themselves that we are standing by their side, because if we don't, then they will start losing motivation.
No sign of that for now, as a flag from a frontline battle is raised in the centre of Vilnius. But Ukraine's president needs this support to mature into meaningful membership of NATO, or else his country's sacrifice will be in vain. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Vilnius.
No worker is ever going to turn down a pay rise, but the rate of wage growth, which increased to an average of 7.3% in the months to May, is causing concern, and not just to the Bank of England. Inflation could be driven higher as a result, and mortgage rates today reached their highest in 15 years. Our business correspondent Paul Kelsey reports.
On the picket line in Coventry, workers think you can get anything at Amazon except a decent pay deal. They're striking, they say, just to make ends meet.
Why are you striking?
Because we are not paying as we are working. I am working hard, but you're not paying. Okay. So we need more money.
At the moment, we are struggling with our life. So we are struggling with the family, with everything going high. So we want a better pay. Is your mortgage getting more expensive too?
Yes, it is. Double.
Wow.
What's happening here at Amazon is being repeated across the country. Now, not everybody's on strike, but workers are pushing employers for higher wages to keep up with the cost of living. And employers facing a worker shortage and struggling to recruit and retain staff are paying up to make sure they have the people they need to do the job.
The result is average earnings rising by 7.3% in the 3 months to May, a record level, despite unemployment also going up. The Chancellor and Governor of the Bank of England say that's fuelling inflation, but wages are still not keeping up with prices, rising at 8.7%. If growth took off, it would help bring inflation back down to earth. But for that, Britain needs to address a worker shortage. These Midlands school children may be the engineers of the future, but potential employers say they need staff now.
We've got a very aggressive growth plan. We're planning to double our turnover within about 3 to 4 years. We've got the equipment, we've got the space, we've got the capital. It's the people that is a critical bit now.
Recruitment and attraction is in our top 3 issues at the moment, and we have to work twice as hard for twice as long to recruit half the people.
with interest rates set to rise further and mortgage rates at a 15-year high, higher even than after Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget, there's likely more turbulence ahead. Paul Kelso, Sky News in Coventry.
New figures show a steep rise in deaths on US streets linked to xylazine, often referred to as tranq or the zombie drug. Use of it has spread across America at such alarming speed that the White House has pledged urgent action to tackle the crisis. Well, Sky's US correspondent Mark Stone first saw the impact at first hand in Philadelphia back in February. Now he's returned. A warning his story includes images of the wounds and injuries sustained by drug users and some people using the drug.
It still looks pretty bad.
It's really bad.
It is 5 months since we were last here, a place of such remarkable and stark hopelessness still.
People out here are lost, man. People out here are hurting, man. Like, people out here come from broken homes. People out here really don't have a reason to live anymore. Like, they're here to die.
Back in February, we thought these streets represented something new. An emerging drug cocktail, tranq, was causing horrific wounds. Certainly the medics here were shocked by what they were seeing, and the city's health officials said they feared a nationwide spread. But it turns out it's already firmly established across America's drug market. The White House has now accepted that tranq, or xylazine, represents what they call a grave threat to the nation, and they're not wrong. For you, this was something that began with painkillers, prescribed, then self-medicated, and it went from there.
Yeah. Continued and from there. I really didn't have any place taking me seriously.
Christoph is injecting as he talks.
There's this young guy.
It takes just seconds.
And then it was just like, what am I gonna do? Yeah.
He drifts off. Sorry, we'll leave you to have a seat.
Yeah.
New analysis of data stretching back to 2019 shows a jump in xylazine-related deaths of 276%. It has now been detected in 48 of the 50 US states. The government's national plan involves access to prevention, harm reduction treatment and recovery support, as well as bold actions to disrupt the supply. Have you seen any sort of change in state or federal help over the past few months?
No.
As before, our guide through all this is volunteer Ronnie Kaiser.
I'm glad they're finally implementing something. I just hope that the implementation is fast enough and it's the correct one. Most have either mental health or trauma that's been in their life.
Well, there is no question for me that things are starkly worse now than they were just a few months ago. Everyone here seems to welcome the White House plan, but honestly, the challenges, the complexities are so huge. And now we know that increasingly it is replicated nationwide. Christoph was back with us within just a few minutes. The hits are intense, but short, and of course, highly addictive. Mark Stone, Sky News in Philadelphia.
A people smuggler has been jailed for more than 12 years for the manslaughter of 39 people who were found dead in a lorry trailer in Essex in 2019. Marius Meher-Dragici pleaded guilty at the Old Bailey last month to 39 counts of manslaughter and conspiracy to assist unlawful immigration. He fled the country after the bodies were discovered and was detained by police in Romania last August and returned to the UK. A 15-year-old boy has been charged in connection with an incident in a Gloucestershire school where a teacher was stabbed. Jamie Sampson, a maths teacher at Tewkesbury Academy, has said tonight that he is recovering well. The boy, who cannot be named, will appear in court tomorrow on charges of attempted wounding with intent and possession of a bladed article on school premises. Police in France, who are looking for a missing toddler in the Alps, have said they have no clues as to what might have happened to him. 2-year-old Emile was last seen walking down the street near his grandparents' house on Saturday. Police have entered every house in the small settlement and searched nearby fields and forests. Now, Nicole Thea was a YouTube star with hundreds of thousands of followers. 3 years ago, when she was 8 months pregnant, she died. She'd suffered a cardiac arrest caused by an undiagnosed heart condition. Despite raising concerns during her pregnancy, her mother says Nicole wasn't taken seriously because of the colour of her skin. Sky Shimon Freeman-Powell has this report.
Just going to be talking to you guys about my pregnancy so far.
When influencer Nicole Thea found out she was pregnant, she couldn't wait to tell the world, documenting the journey to hundreds of thousands of her followers.
Oh, Nicole was so excited. They both were excited. Nicole was team girl and Bugger was team boy. And I suppose when Nicole was about maybe 5, 6 months pregnant is when she first started to talk to me about breathlessness.
These are concerns that Nicole herself says that she expressed to a midwife.
Yeah, the worst thing about my pregnancy is that I'm always out of breath. I could walk from here to the end of the room and I'd feel like I'm dying. Like, I went to my midwife and I was like, oh my God, like, is this normal?
But 3 years later, instead of celebrating the 3rd birthday of her grandchild Rain, Nicole's mum is marking the 3-year anniversary of her only child and grandchild's deaths.
I also believe that because Nicole is a woman of colour, that she was failed on that front because she just wasn't taken seriously. I think if she wasn't a woman of colour, she would have been referred to a consultant.
Nicole died of a cardiac arrest caused by an undiagnosed heart condition, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. But Sam thinks that societal issues could have also been at play. The latest data shows that the risk of maternal death was almost 4 times higher among black and ethnic minority women compared to white women. But it's not just mothers' lives being lost. In 2021, babies from the black ethnic group continued to have the highest rates of death. The government says we set up the Maternity Disparities Task Force, which brings together experts from across the health system, government departments and the voluntary sector to explore and consider evidence-based interventions to tackle maternal disparities.
What there hasn't been is a specific strategy and target around black maternal deaths, and cases like Nicole's highlight how crucial it is that we make sure women are listened to, that their health concerns are acted upon.
3 years on, and time hasn't healed the huge hole left in Sam's heart following the death of her daughter. Shimon Freeman-Powell, Sky News.
Well, to Wimbledon now, and Novak Djokovic remains on course for a 5th straight singles title at Wimbledon. He's through to the semi-finals after coming from a set down to beat the Russian 7th seed, Andrei Rublev, and centre court. It is the 12th time he's reached the last 4 at the championships. He'll now face Italy's Yannick Sinner. Meanwhile, the women's top seed, Iga Swiatek, is out after losing to Ukraine's Elina Svitolina in 3 sets. Svitolina was given a wild card for the tournament after only returning to tennis in April following the birth of her daughter last October. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview, including this story on the front page of the Metro about the latest BBC presenter allegations. The BBC star facing fresh claims, their front page. With me tonight, the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj. Back in just a moment. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. At least 2 more young people are reportedly making allegations over the unnamed BBC presenter tonight. Volodymyr Zelensky has said that NATO membership will make his country stronger amid signs of division about when Ukraine could join the alliance as leaders meet in Lithuania. And UK mortgage rates have hit their highest level for 15 years, even as record wage growth threatens the fight against inflation. Well, hello there. You are watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. With me, as you can see this evening, to look at those headlines, I'll be joined by the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj. It's lovely to see you both. As ever, though, we take a look, first of all, at the front pages. The Sun carries more allegations in the BBC presenter controversy, claiming that the unnamed broadcaster broke COVID-19 lockdown rules to meet a 3rd young person. BBC Star facing fresh claims is how the Metro reports news that a 2nd person had earlier come forward with allegations against the man who is already accused of paying for explicit images over one youngster. Well, that development is also lead for the Daily Telegraph as well. The Eye goes into more detail about the allegations involving the 2nd person, saying that the presenter is accused of sending them abusive messages after they hinted they might identify him. The Times, too, concentrates on those alleged abusive threats. Away from the BBC, The Guardian says the Chancellor has told ministers that there will be no extra money for a 6% pay rise for public sector workers. The Daily Mail claims an exclusive with a story that China sent a spy to the House of Commons to eavesdrop on a meeting between MPs and Hong Kong dissidents. Well, the Financial Times leads with the battle by Microsoft to take over another company, Activision Blizzard, in the face of opposition from the US trade regulator. And The Star says scientists are working on what it calls a warp-speed rocket that could get to Mars in just 30 days. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us, specifically our guests. So let's head straight to Jenny and Ali. It's lovely to see you both, obviously. But clearly, we've got a lot to talk about. Let's start with The Sun, new in. Jenny, you kick us off. So we have the first young person who, via their lawyer, sent a letter to the BBC saying that the allegations made in The Sun's original article were rubbish. Now the BBC says a 2nd young person has come through, and now The Sun talks about at least 1 more person. And the allegation is that the BBC unnamed star broke lockdown rules to meet this young person.
It's really difficult to keep up with all of this. But yes, this 3rd set of allegations is that this BBC presenter in February 2021 broke lockdown rules to meet up with another young person. And if you're finding it difficult to keep up, the one thing that you can grab hold of is the idea that these stories are relentless. They keep coming. And there is a sense now that this presenter's position is untenable. You have people like Jeremy Vine, who has nearly 800,000 followers on Twitter, tweeting that this presenter needs to come out and explain himself. We know that this person's name has been circulating on social media. We know that they've been suspended, and at some point people are going to work out that this presenter is not on air. So we're in this kind of absurd situation. And there is this sense that the papers are baying for blood. The BBC today came out with this story, the 2nd allegation, which I mean, maybe we'll come to the details of this 2nd allegation. But to me, that seems to be quite different in texture to the rest of these. But in many ways, I think the BBC has made a rod for its own back in that it was so voracious in its coverage of the Philip Schofield scandal. I remember getting on my phone, breaking news alerts several times a day on a Saturday saying, Holly Willoughby has been on Instagram saying how disappointed she is. And as such, we now have this public appetite for these stories about TV stars and pushing them off their pedestals, that it almost doesn't matter what the substance of the stories are. There is now a momentum to them. This momentum is going to continue. No doubt more stories will come forward. This BBC presenter, their name is one day going to come out, somebody's going to say it by mistake, or it's going to be so absurd that anybody who wants to find this person's name will be able to find it online. And so it's a kind of symptom, really, of how our kind of parallel social media is in a different world to us here on broadcast media, but also how we, as a public, and the newspapers, particularly when it comes to the BBC, have such a bloodlust for people that they're just going to keep on going until this person's career is over. And we don't know the substance of a lot of these allegations. There is so much that we don't know. And in fact, when it comes to the original allegations, it seems that the more we know, the less we know. So I feel, you know, it's a very, very strange situation that says a lot about how we live today, I think.
Yeah, because of the aforementioned letter that was sent to the BBC via this young person's lawyer, and of the Sun for today were asking how did they afford the lawyer? Yes. Which became a whole other ballgame, didn't it? And certainly we had Tim Davie today, or at least the world at one did, speaking to the BBC and not to everybody else. Yes. Like to speak to him on the day that the annual report came out, saying that it's great we have free speech. Most nations don't, or 70-odd% of nations don't. Therefore, the BBC newsroom can pursue it. And so they did with this second allegation that came out.
They did, yeah, and indeed, the second allegations come out. And just to your point, Jenny, about the public baying for blood, when we're baying for blood, I would just like to mention two names in that context. One is Paul Gambaccini, the other one is Cliff Richard. We have to be very, very careful about trial by social media. We need to dial this down. If there impropriety has taken place of a criminal nature or otherwise, if BBC standards and protocols have been breached, both of those things need to be investigated. So there's a police investigation going on the one hand. The BBC,
or not an investigation, or an examination.
An examination
of
the facts to see if there's something there to be done. And the BBC, I'm sure, will have its own questions to answer. But we need to not jump to conclusions without knowing the facts. And the point you raised, Jenny, quite rightly, is that the original allegation that was brought by the parents, as I understand it, the lawyers of the individual concerned are now saying that there's no truth to this. So it is very confusing. I think we need to dial it down. And what I would say to the likes of Jeremy Vine, who I have a lot of time and respect for, is that we just need to be careful and let the due process take its course. But it is very unedifying, and it's difficult for the BBC, particularly on the back of Gary Lineker issues and other things generally about the BBC's had a tough time, and it is not an easy period for them.
And there have been questions about the Sun. You know, where is your evidence? Where are the bank statements in case one?
Yes.
The questions for the BBC, as we heard from Tim Davie today, about the timeline and whether protocols were actually pursued. Before we come on to the detail of the second, let's just examine that. So, first of all, we found out that the parents went to a BBC office and then phoned a number, and then there was an email and a telephone call back from the BBC, neither of which came to fruition, effectively. And then it was left for several weeks, is what we learnt today. Tim Davie saying red flags probably not raised quickly enough. You know, where are we at with what the BBC did for the original claim?
I would say that that is the substance of what there is to look at here. Is the BBC complaints procedure quick enough? Can it identify problems soon enough? Clearly, in this case, it failed because the parents involved went to the Sun rather than trusting that the BBC was going to deal with this. But the BBC is a very large organisation with a lot of people on screen. There are a lot of people that complain to the BBC about a lot of things. I'm sure there are a lot of people who make allegations about high-profile stars that have no substance. Of course, the BBC must take everything seriously, particularly when it involves a duty of care to a minor, a young person, and serious allegations like this. But you can understand why they wouldn't immediately take somebody off air. I mean, yes, it sounds like emails weren't looked at. It says there was an attempt to make a phone call, but contact didn't go through, which I don't know if that means that the number wasn't right or they got a voicemail, but clearly they could have tried harder. But you have to look at this in the context of a public service broadcaster with a lot of household names and a lot of people who make malicious claims like this. Often, I have been at the BBC and seen the log. There are some really crazy people that call in all the time. There's a lot of comments to go through.
Well, 250 in 6 months, I think, is what Tim Davie said. So let's look at the eye then. BBC presenter accused of sending abusive message to a second person. Young person claims they were sent abusive, expletive-filled messages by the BBC star after they hinted they might reveal his identity. That was one. And also the Metro with the same story, BBC star facing fresh claims, Ali?
We don't know we just read what we see here.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to sort of discern what happened. We don't know the kind of text messages that were exchanged. I mean, if someone was trying to reveal the identity of a very famous person, that itself is concerning. Obviously, that's no excuse for giving allegedly expletive-filled text messages.
But it might cause panic, I suppose.
I suppose, but then, you know, we don't know the circumstances. But
well, there are some things we do know. We do know that this person was in their 20s. They were not a minor. They were not a child. We do know that this was on a dating app. We know that the BBC verified this phone number, so it is the phone number of the presenter. I have to say, this sounds like a very unpleasant experience for this person on the dating app, but a lot of unpleasant experiences happen on dating apps. This is not in the same realm as my 17-year-old child was given money in exchange for sexually explicit pictures, which is the original claim, which the Sun is kind of rolling back on in a way. I mean, these latest allegations are much softer than those. So I think we need to look at this second allegation in the context of that. And I'm sure this was very unpleasant. I'm sure nobody likes to be abused and sent threatening messages. But this is a 20-year-old on a dating app.
But also, as we read it, Jenny, we don't know. It seems like the abuse may have started after the threat to name the individual concerned.
Yes, that's
right, which would be
how
quite concerning if you're a very reputable household name presenter, as we understand it, that someone would threaten you with that. I find that also a bit unsavoury. So we just don't know exactly.
And it is in the context of, I mean, you know, the whole Philip Schofield, his defence was that it was ill-advised but not illegal. It is ill-advised if you're a famous person to be being abusive. But, you know, in the Philip Schofield case, the person involved was somebody who he was in a position of power over at work. There is no suggestion of any of this. The problem is we're lumping all these things in together. It is turning into a giant story that has massive momentum. I'm sure that there will be more stories that break, but at the moment I feel really sorry for the young people involved in this, and I feel sorry for this BBC presenter, and I feel sorry for other BBC presenters who've been drawn into it. It is a sorry state of affairs.
And the point about allegation number one, refuted as rubbish, as we know, is that under the age of 18, the sharing of explicit material, you know, you're counted as a child up to 18, even though the age of consent is 16. And, of course, the Sun's latest allegation about the breaking of lockdown laws is something also that might draw the police's attention. Telegraph also going with this. BBC sex scandal presenter facing a new allegation. The new case involves a second individual in their early 20s who claimed they were contacted anonymously by the presenter via a dating app, then subjected to threatening and abusive messages. So that was the one released by BBC News, as you said. Meantime, the other questions for The Sun we've talked about is where's their evidence? And secondly, for the BBC, the other elements that came out with Tim Davie, that he has chosen not to speak to the presenter involved, that he is overseeing, you know, effectively all of it, not just that part of it, spoken by a senior manager, and refusing to say whether what the presenter had said, whether they had resigned. You know, in a sense, they didn't give us so much information because they've had to give up their investigation while the police look at it.
Well, this is where due process comes in, and this is where I think Tim Davie, it was right that he went out on the airwaves today. Obviously, the annual report of the BBC was out, so he had no choice. He was asked some pretty robust questions by his own journalists, actually, on this, as you would expect. But if, obviously, the police are now looking into this matter, that has to take precedence. And I'm sure that the BBC will, in time, have to do its own investigation into what happened and how it handled it and how quickly it responded to some of these claims.
Yes, indeed. 7 weeks until the presenter himself was spoken to was what we also learnt today. Anyway, stay there, both of you. Lots more still to come in the next part of our programme, including the unhappy news for many homeowners that mortgage stress is set to worsen, according to the IMF. That and more when we come back.
This is effectively a neonatal incubator, and just being able to bring it into your studio today is a pretty big thing. We're offering a way to make healthcare flexible within the NHS at the moment and other countries around the world. So this is a full neonatal incubator, which I've brought into your studio today.
Wow.
Usually, you'd probably need a crane to get one of these systems in, a massive, big, bulky, heavy piece of equipment.
And tell me what it's used for while you're putting it together for me.
So what you're trying to do is you're trying to keep a baby, when they're born preterm, in something called the thermal neutral zone. And you can think of it kind of at the temperature of a mother's womb. It means they're spending their energy on growing rather than trying to keep themselves warm. And it's the very base of neonatal care. So if you think of neonatal care as kind of an upside-down triangle, thermoregulation really is the bottom of it. Without it, nothing else goes well. So this is a device that really is meant to save kids and not just let them survive, but also thrive. And you can see, you know, we've worked a lot on the usability of the device. So it goes up very easily, one button operation, included battery inside of it, and you've got everything you need. It's being used in the NHS to keep babies closer to mother and father in a very stressful time. We're saving time, money, bed stays, but also in countries like Ukraine at the moment, where because it's flexible, we can go down to bomb shelters and into NICU. It means they don't have to choose between keeping babies warm or the nurses potentially being maimed, which is a horrible state to be in, but we can offer them something that helps. Originally, I'm a product design engineer by background. We're given the brief to design something that solves a problem. With that, I watched a documentary. They explained that because they lacked what they thought was a simple medical device globally, so not just places where you might think of these, but parts of the NHS, US, they're effectively losing entire generations. I then told my parents about it and found out my mother was one of the first babies in incubation in the UK in the 1960s. I've got pictures of it as well. So it became a personal story for me then as well. I wouldn't be here without one of these. We've got our manufacturing in the UK, we've got more development to do. The vision of the company is to give smarter healthcare access to children. We've got lots of other products we want to develop. This is just the start. This is just our flag in the ground.
Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me once again, the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj. Welcome back to both of you. Let's head to the NATO summit, shall we? Lithuania, the Baltic states amongst those who are most supportive of Ukraine joining, you know, a sense that they fear they might be next. Front page of the Financial Times on this one, the so-called family photo of leaders. You know, it looks like unity, but there are, Ali, divisions, aren't there, about what to do about Ukraine?
Well, there are, in the sense that the whole issue now is when does Ukraine actually become a full-fledged member of NATO? Now, they're talking about special privileged status of some kind at the moment in terms of giving security guarantees. We also know that we are, in a not-so-tacit way, giving active support to Ukraine. So the Ukrainian, I mean, he said it was absolutely absurd that no timetable to membership was given, which I think is a little bit ungrateful, given the fact that the West is supporting, the NATO allies are supporting him. Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary-General, indicated that there wouldn't be the normal accession process. There would be some sort of political decision made here. So the mood music is moving in the right direction. But we've also got to bear in mind that if Ukraine was to come into NATO right now, Article 5 would be invoked straight away and NATO would be at war. That's not going to happen. So this is going to be playing out.
And it would be nuclear powers at war.
Indeed. So you had a muddy communique, which you always have in these things, that satisfies no one, and Zelensky's certainly on the warpath about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And extraordinary crowds for Zelensky, who we are told is meeting Biden at the summit on Wednesday. You know, huge crowds, the absurdities you say. The problem is, if they say, well, of course you're going to join NATO once the war is over, it's an incentive to Russia to continue low-level conflict indefinitely, which will cost the West, obviously, in terms of munitions and armaments.
But you can understand Zelensky's frustration. He said that this makes NATO sound absurd and look weak. And it does, in a way, because it makes it look like NATO will do whatever it takes to avoid conflict. Here you have Ukraine, which is has at the moment the biggest army in Europe, could be quite a useful asset to NATO. Of course, we know why, and it's Germany and the US who are holding back, and the Baltic states who, of course, are terrified of Russia because they know that if the invasion is successful of Ukraine, they could be next. So you can completely understand why Zelensky is so frustrated. It does kind of make a mockery of NATO, but it's completely politically understandable. Nobody wants to be at war with a nuclear superpower.
And certainly people I was speaking to this evening talk about the need for reform in Ukraine's civil society before membership is considered. Civil society that breaks down in conflict, it's quite a tall order, is it not? Wage growth, we heard today, 7.3%, and yet The Guardian reporting there will be no extra cash for pay in the public sector. We know about the strikes. Disappointment given perhaps what the private sector is seeing, Ali.
Well, the cost of living crisis continues. It's very, very difficult out there. 8.7% inflation, food inflation, much higher than that, probably 19%. The independent pay review bodies that the government was hiding behind last year were saying 6% or whatever it was, and the government was saying, oh, we must abide by the recommendations of the independent pay review bodies. That's when they wanted to, when the strikers were asking for a lot more. Now the independent pay review bodies are saying something between 6 and 6.5%, and the government's not committing to do that. You can't have it both ways. The government needs to have some credibility on this. What Jeremy Hunt said, he indicated at the Mansion House last night, does not want to have inflationary pay rises. That will embed it. This is what Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, also said, that once you start having this wage price spiral, it gets embedded into the system. We're seeing signs of that now.
And the difficulty is, if we look at the other story on the Guardian front page, mortgage stress is likely to worsen, according to the IMF. The difficulty is fewer people now have mortgages in this country. 37% I read, and they have, some of them have fixed rate mortgages. Therefore, the big squeeze with high interest rates happens more slowly and presumably therefore goes on for longer.
But there are also people who rent who are going to feel the effects of higher mortgage rates. I mean, the thing is, we may have pay increases in the private sector of 7.3%, but inflation is higher than that. So we are all feeling poorer. We are all feeling the squeeze. And I think all of us are feeling like, when are things going to start getting better? I mean, we're back in the studio. That's great news. But you know, we could do with some more good news.
You're easily pleased, to be fair. Both of you, lovely to see you and to have you here as well. Jenny Kleeman, Ali Miraj, thank you both very much indeed.